What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 26th episode of Tequila Tuesday. And I am joined today by one of my best friends in the city of Austin, Paige Drews. Paige and I have known each other, we were just talking about it, for 10 years. We met when I first moved to Austin at a company called Main Street Hub. And she had never done sales before. She'll walk you through kind of how she got into sales and why she decided to go for it. And probably a funny story or two she can share about the interview process, and kind of how she started her career and moved to sales manager, and then came to, another company with me, Outbound Engine. And she's done enterprise sales, transactional sales, sales leadership, tons of operational kind of sales ops, rev ops stuff that I was terrible at. She was a big help with. And she moved into a couple of VPs of sales roles. One of them was a company called Indio that I was an advisor to, and helped get Paige in there. And Paige grew them so fast that they had an exit within about 18 months of her being there. 9-figure exit, good outcome. And that catapulted her to be the VP of sales where she's at now. It's a company called Talru. And I won't share exact details, but 9-figure plus annual revenue, which is pretty amazing. And I've never run a company that had 9-figure ARR before, so I'm sure she won't be shy in telling you that she has surpassed me. And yeah, she's thumbing her nose at me already. No, but she's super knowledgeable and just a great resource. And you'll see over the course of this conversation probably why a lot of people have said that she's like the female form of Scott Leese, which we got teased with many, many times before. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Paige. Drop your questions into the chat. As usual, I'll take a running cue and pull you off mute one at a time so you can ask her, and we'll get into it. Paige, welcome to Tequila Tuesday.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's crazy. We were talking about 10 years, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, and sometimes it feels like just yesterday that we met. So I appreciate you having me on here, and anytime that we get to talk. Awesome. So wanted to correct one little thing, that I was actually in sales before, and I will get to that, but it's pretty funny, and maybe you guys have seen people just like me. And I guess the point of that is any sales at all can be a good start. But I did start on a farm, ran a family farm for about 10 years. And it really taught me a lot of lessons that I ended up really utilizing within my relationship with Lise, which was to be tough and to grow a tough skin. It also helped me to learn how to prioritize, and also how to find passion and joy in what you do. If anybody has ever lived the lifestyle of a farmer, it is squinting at the sky, praying for rain on a daily basis. It'll break your heart. I have said so many times that the worst boss in the world is Mother Nature. She's a bitch of a boss, and there's no negotiating with her. And so that role and that job was that was a time in my life that I needed to get out of my system, and I really loved it. Taught me a lot, but have found my passion here in sales. About 11 years ago, my life just kind of fell apart. Went through a really, really nasty divorce, and it was life-changing, as those tend to be, but it was especially difficult because I was the mother of 3 daughters. My father was in late stages of Alzheimer's and cancer. I was his secondary caregiver, and I was also about to lose my home due to a foreclosure. Was working 3 jobs. One of those was at HEB, which was my first sales role. I was the #1 chicken and wine seller in all of HEB.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Funny little story. When I would sell wine, I would oftentimes scare people because they thought I was a cardboard cutout. I'm very, very tall and I had long blonde hair. And I guess they just thought I was a wine cutout person. And I would start talking to them and they'd scream and jump. But I ended up being their number one seller in all of Texas and Mexico included, selling chicken and wine in little old Georgetown, Texas. I knew that I wasn't going to make it on $17,000 a year. And so started looking through my network and looking for roles. And I really came to this realization, and a lot of us do this. And how I found myself in sales was I had my back against the wall and I realized I need to either credential myself, which is going to take a lot of money and a lot of time, and neither of which I had, or I can quickly climb the ladder by saying, this is how much my last boss saw value in what I did. Where can I do that? Where can I make a lot of money? Where can I be paid a lot of money and take that and go someplace else and say, this person thought I was worth X amount of dollars? And that was sales. And so I found this really cool little place called Main Street Hub. I'm an artist as well, and I had a couple paintings to drop off at a gallery downtown Austin, and knew it was there on 6th Street, and literally walked in off the road and said, it was poking around in the office building, and another good friend of ours, Scott Partlow, came out and said, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm looking for Scott. And he said, well, I'm Scott. And I said, hey, Mr. Lease, it's good to meet you. And he said, oh, that's the VP of sales. I said, well, that's who I'm here to speak with. I had an entire pitch for him, and it was actually one of the reasons that I got an interview. I was told that that was basically their intro of what they were using to get in. And he finally said, are you looking for a job? And I said, I might be able to be talked into one. And so they brought me in the next day for an interview. And instead of just the traditional interview style, they put me on the phones and had me on the phones making free dials for them for an hour. And by the end of that hour, I was handing off a credit card paper for someone else to close a deal. So
True story.
Yeah.
True story.
And so I was hired there on the spot. That's about, for Main Street Hub in the beginning, where my luck kind of ran out, because I ended up on my third strike to be let go from the company. And my manager pulled me aside and said, you know, you've got everything you need, but this isn't connecting for you. And I went home and I thought, you know what the fuck? I've been good at everything I've ever done except for skiing, and I'm just not getting this. I'm going to stop caring so much, and I'm just going to see this out for the rest of the month, and I'll have another job waiting for me. I've got another paycheck at least coming my way. I'm not going to worry about it. And the next day I went in and I stopped selling, and I started just having conversations with people and looking for someone nice to talk to on the phone. And I closed a deal. And the next day I came in and closed another one. And on the third day, I closed another one. And on the fourth day, just like God Almighty, I took a break. And on the fifth day, I came in and I closed another one. And so I saved my job. But I realized in that time, and I never looked back from there. I ended up being a top producer for the company for the rest of my time with Main Street Hub. But there was this realization that I had that sales, it wasn't my passion. And at that time, you know, having gone through the divorce and finding myself again and figuring out where I belong in this world, I was listening to all the gurus and I was reading a lot, and I was just filling my head with all of this self-help stuff. And now I realize it was a lot of toxic positivity, which neither Lisa and I suffer from, right, Lisa?
That's right.
But I realized, you know, I'm hearing all of these people talk about, you know, you got to do what you love. You really need to do what you love. And I wasn't doing what I loved. I was making 100 dials a day. And I was being screamed out, being told to dial more. And I was talking to people who didn't want to hear my voice and who kept telling me that I was bothering them in the middle of the day. And so I went through this period of real self-reflection where I just realized I'm not one of those lucky ones. And I think as salespeople that struggle with what we do and the stigma that's around salespeople, and if we ended up not following our dreams, there's a thing that we've got to go through, and you've got to use your mindset to break through that barrier. And that barrier is, I'm stuck doing this. The reality is, I wasn't one of the lucky ones that knew what I wanted to be when I was a child and I grew up to follow that dream. I just didn't know. Every time you asked me when I was a kid, I was going to be something else, something different. And I realized I'm not that person who said I'm going to be a teacher and then grew up to be the teacher. I want to do all of these things. I want to collect a lifetime of stories and experiences. How can I make what I'm doing now feed that? Because that's my passion. I want to hear these stories from people. I want to experience different things in my life. And I'm in this role that can afford me to do those things. And as soon as that happened, a light switch went off and I started to fall in love with my job. It wasn't an overnight thing. The light switch did go off and there was a change in me. I became open to that. And over the course of this past 10 years, this decade, I have really fallen in love with what I do as somebody who borderline resented being a salesperson when I started. There were a lot of things that Lise would tell me. We always had desks right across from each other, and he'd poke his head around the computer and he'd say, I'm pretty sure I'm paying you to close deals, not to be right. Oh, boss, we know who wears the pants. and and that really stuck with me because I always seemed to have like this chip of like, I need to be right, I need to do this and all of these things. And the reality was, when I started treating it as an experience to learn about people and to learn about myself in relation to the way that I was being communicated with, how I was being received, doors started opening for me, and I started to really find my way. So from there, I moved over to Outbound Engine. And one little thing that I wanted to say about this was I went from selling to any brick and mortar to selling to real estate agents, insurance agents, loan officers. And Lisa and I both agree in the notion that it's can be definitely a positive to be industry agnostic. How often have you gone into an interview and they're like, well, do you have industry experience? You know, the reality is when I was selling wine, I wasn't a wine drinker, although I'm actually blonde and a woman. And people would come up to me and I would read the back of the label and I would get there quickly and early and they'd drink it and I'd listen to what they'd say. I'd listen to what they'd say and then I'd wait for the right time and I'd throw it back to people. And I cannot tell you how many times I was complimented as being finally having somebody in HEB that knew about wine, where the reality was I was just giving back what I had so calmly listened to. And that's what I did at Outbound Engine. I just decided for the first couple months, I'm just going to talk to people. I'm going to find a really kind voice on the phone, which is still my number one piece of advice when my reps are struggling. Just go find a kind voice and talk to people and hear about them. And so it gave me the tools and it taught me some lessons on being industry agnostic. I can sell to anybody. I can sell anything. I know that the key to it is just listening to people. I've oftentimes said, you know, it's like when you're on public transportation and you're sitting next to somebody who won't shut the fuck up and you get up to finally leave. And what do they say? They always say, man, I feel like I know you so well. And you're like, I said 3 fucking words this entire time. People just don't really care what you have to say. They want to talk about themselves. And if you spit that back to them, you'd be surprised at how agnostic to industries you can actually get away with. So Lisa and I had a pretty pivotal conversation there. I came in as an account executive and he had been talking to me since I guess probably my 3rd month at Main Street Hub saying, you know, it's clear that you're meant for leadership. When are you going to let me promote you into leadership? I was like, oh, well, let me think. More responsibilities and less money. I pass. And I finally walked into his office one day and I said, I just don't know what I'm doing here anymore. You know, I'm burnt out. This is no longer fun for me. And he said, you've got three choices. You can leave and reinvent yourself, which you've proven you can do. You can refocus yourself and get back into it and blow out any of your sales goals that you've reset for yourself, or you can take my advice, let me promote you into leadership, and just say that we're not finished here. And so that's what I did. And so I went from being a sales rep literally on a Friday to being a manager of a full team of mixed reps, reps that had been there, and brand new reps on a Monday. And we closed 90% to goal that first month. And again, I didn't look back. So really found my stride in leadership. I'm definitely a servant leader. I like to have my boots on the ground with people and get down and dirty and in the muck and the mire, love call reviews, love coaching, all of that stuff. But the further up the ladder that I climbed, the more it became kind of second nature for me. And so going to become a director, it was another conversation I had with Lise. And Lise, maybe you remember this. It started with I think you said a swear word. I think you yelled at me through text.
Oh, me?
Yeah, because I laughed at you. I laughed at you. You were expecting something to change without changing anything, and I laughed. And you said, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" So I walked over to him and I said, "Well, you're expecting something to change without, and nothing is changing." And so I told him, "It's time for you to either promote me to director or hire someone who will."
I remember that.
Yeah. And you were pissed. You were pissed. But he did it. And that change happened that afternoon. And I think that we did a great job together with a second layer to your management. And again, it ended up just kind of being my thing. And it was awesome. And I did that for about a year. And then I stepped back into an AE role and was an independent contributor. And that was a really weird thing, but it was good to get back into the mindset and the perspective of a direct salesperson and really enjoyed it. From there, decided I really missed leadership and went right back into leadership and became a VP of Indio, which was a tumultuous time. To be very frank, I wish that I had Lisa's new book in my side pocket. I had him in my ear all the time. There were many tears shed over the course of that year, for sure. He was my sounding board and oftentimes my rock while I got through that. But it was a successful exit, and I'm thankful for it. And all of the struggles that I went through there, which I'm happy to get into if anyone has any questions about it, teed me up and made me so much more grateful for when I did find my home, which is now Talru, where I lead a team in a hyper growth phase. We're going from, I had 8 sales reps 2 weeks ago, and by August I'll have 30. And so, which is up from the last time I talked with you, Lise. So it's chugging along, and we're doing just really well. And so a lot of things have had to be flexible in my life. My social life has been flexible. My motherhood life has been flexible. My romantic life has had to be really flexible. And I have very strong boundaries around each of those in order to be in the place that I am now. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
All right. It's a great story. I love hearing all of that, especially all the times that I was allegedly mean to you.
I used to say, it feels like you've got your boot on my back. It was just, which I needed. You know, we all use a boot on the back every once in a while.
Yeah. Well, let's start with Gemma. Gemma had a question about balancing some things. So, and if anybody else has a question, please drop them in the chat now. Go ahead, Gemma.
Hi, Paige. Nice to meet you. Really enjoyed hearing your story. I'm just wondering how you were able to balance being a divorcee with 3 daughters and a career in sales.
Yeah. So I'm one of those that I believe that there is such thing as balance. You know, you hear this argument that there isn't balance, and you know, it kind of goes back and forth. I do believe there's balance. But it doesn't look like a teeter-totter. It doesn't look like this. It looks like a circus performer who is spinning plates on those sticks. You know what I'm talking about? I've always kind of been that way. I have just a few plates that I know that I can spin, and I'm very, very conscientious and extremely thoughtful about the plates that I allow into my life. So balancing sales and motherhood is no problem whatsoever. Balancing sales and motherhood and running a household and taking care of animals and making sure that the yard is kept clean and making sure that there's food in the kitchen, making sure that the laundry gets done, that's the shit that wears you out. And so I have prioritized my life in a way that only the things that, one, bring me joy, and two, make my life easier are allowed in my life. And so I don't go to the grocery store. I pay for it. I don't cut my own yard. I pay for it. You know, if my kids need something, you know, when everybody was doing the homeschooling, I knew I couldn't homeschool. I can't balance like that. My daughters and their education is one of my priorities, but I knew I couldn't do it. So I hired a tutor. Now, there are a lot of people out there that would say, well, I don't have the money to do this. And I would challenge you by saying, the day I started investing in the things that brought efficiency to my life is the day I realized, and I became a better salesperson for it, that sometimes you've got to make investments in efficiency to drive more ROI. It's the day that I started making $1 a day more than I had before. Because as much as we can tell ourselves my time is worth more than this, sometimes you just need to take the leap. You need to take the cost. You need to buy the software. You need to spend the money on the ship driver. You need to do whatever it takes in order to get that time that you say is so valuable. You've just got to bite the bullet and buy the software. It's the same conversation, right? You're constantly talking about, oh, this will make your life easier. You can believe it that way. You got to believe it for yourself too.
Cool. Paige, do you remember
Wow.
Paige, do you remember when I told you never do something yourself? You can get somebody else, you can pay for somebody else to do for you or something like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Lise can do how many things on your own?
Very few.
Very few. Super successful, and just pay for other people to do them for you.
Yeah, they all know that, but you have like experienced it in the flesh, side by side, of how useless I am at things. Thanks for bringing that up, though. Appreciate that. We'll go to Brian. Brian has a question about reinvention.
Hey, Paige, long time.
Oh yeah, how's it going, Brian?
Good. So when you were telling your story, you talked about how you reinvented yourself a few times, and the conversation that you had with Scott in the time where you weren't sure what you wanted to do. Just curious, like, what makes you think that you're good? Like, what qualities do you think are the reason why you're good at reinventing yourself, you know, going from one place to another? And even like now, I believe, and knowing you a little bit, like, I believe that if you wanted to do anything else, you could go and do it and you would figure out a way. So yeah. Curious, like, what qualities that you see are most important?
Yeah. So one of my qualities is I am by nature an incredibly curious person. And I'm interviewing a lot right now. And it's one of the things that I talk to people all the time about is being curious, being that A+ student that has that hunger to learn and constantly envelop anything that's around you, around me. So I'm a naturally curious person. It doesn't take me a lot or very long for me to find something that interests me and to really fully dive into it. And so once my back is into it, I just kind of go with the flow. You know, that's one of the things that really has been a good trait of mine. There's another trait that was a really bad trait that I recognized in myself, that I have spent and I still spend a lot of time focused on, which is I really, really dislike change. Like to the level that I realized one day that it was going to hold me back because I'm in sales and I wanted to be in leadership in sales. And the last thing anybody hiring a leader of sales is, I really hate change. You know, that's like, okay, go be an engineer, go and go do product, do these things that have very slow iterations. I hated change. And so I really focused on how do I change that, that detrimental flaw into something that would benefit me. And so, you know this, Brian, I'm a pretty chill, laid back person by nature. And I've gotten this, you know, you're a very calming kind of person. And so it's like, that's what I'll do. I will combat and I'm going to fight and rage against this disgust of change. And I'm going to instill calm in places of chaos. And so, Brian, you can probably, Brian and I have worked together. You might be able to see some of these things. It's why I like Johnny so much, our sales ops manager. It's why things are so organized and so cleaned up, and why process is in place, and why I'm so adamant about following process. It's my way of controlling the chaos and bringing calm to those situations of flux and change. And so those are the two things that I think that, you know, are traits of mine that have allowed me to be super flexible and take on these new priorities. I guess the third would be that I have come to peace with letting go of those things that are just not working. And so, you know, I can shed very easily my preconceived notions of things and just let go and on to the next.
Cool. All right, Jacqueline has a question. She wants you to dig in a little bit more on the rep to manager and why you finally did it. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Thank you. Hey, Paige, good to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you again.
Glad to hear your team is growing. So exciting.
Yeah.
Wow, really red in the face. Sorry, alarming. I would love to know why you went from a manager back to an individual contributor and then back to manager again. Would just love to hear a little bit more. And I apologize if you mentioned this. My dog was barking and I'm having hot flashes, but please, I would love, this is being recorded. Shit.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of this was a personal thing. I had been a sales director about a year. Lise had been the VP when I was a sales director, I think for 2 months of that period. When he left, it was a very different place, obviously. He was and still is one of my closest friends. He was my absolute mentor. To lose somebody like that changes everything. You know, people will say, and you hear this all the time, people don't leave companies, they leave bosses. Well, in this case, Lise missed the memo that if he were to leave, he was supposed to take me with him. And so he left and I was there to run, you know, as a director, this organization that went through immense amounts of change. I mean, we had a new leader who was the antithesis of everything that Lise is, to be very frank and open. And it was just a lot. And I took on a lot. I threw myself into it. I watched things succeed. I watched a lot of things fail. It was very draining on my mental state, and to be very vulnerable and open with everybody, I needed to heal some, and I needed to take a break and take a rest for a little while. It's been something that I've been pretty damn good at between every big role that I've taken, that I've given myself periods of rest to really just refocus. I spent a year of rest between Indio and Tauru where I did nothing. I spent 7 months of that going absolutely insane because I thought I needed to be busy all the time. And then the following 5 months, actually realizing that there's a whole lot to life that I could learn from if I just slowed everything down. And so that was the lesson that was needing to be learned. Don't think I learned it when I was an AE. I just knew that I needed some rest. But I was taking some time to kind of slow down, to gain some more perspective, to do a few things that with a good friend of mine who had asked me to come and work with them. So there were a couple things, but the biggest was I really needed to just take a step back, catch my breath, and kind of reevaluate things. Oh, you're on.
I was just going to say that that's really, thank you. And that's really refreshing to hear, because you're always thinking about your next play, your next step, and you kind of feel like you're on this rat race and it's exhausting. And so to hear that you even took a year off and some of that was to do nothing, like that just makes you so human. Like, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Amy, you're up on a question about going back to individual contributor.
Well, I think that's what we just covered. So am I allowed to ask a different question, Scott?
You are allowed to improvise, yes.
Paige, thank you for joining us today. I was looking forward to this evening once I saw your name pop up and read a little bit about your story. Okay, so I'm curious about this year of tears, the year where you were on a push towards some kind of exit. And I'm sorry if I misinterpreted the story, but I'd love to hear more about what was hard about that for you and what you learned and what you, I'm not to say did differently, but, took away from that time period.
Yeah. So the thing that was difficult was it was just not a great match for me. It's interesting looking back and seeing some of the missteps that I took. I think it goes all the way back to even the interview process of wanting something more than being that I wanted something so much that I wasn't honest with myself to see like the red flags and oh, I don't know that this is going to work out. You hear all the time sales is like dating. You're like, I really want this to work. I really want it to work. And you ignore the red flags, and then the red flags kill you. And you're like, yeah, maybe I could have seen that coming. Really appreciate and respect the leadership of the company, but we were really misaligned on a lot of things. Part of the problem was corporate was in San Francisco, and I opened up an office in Austin. And so just the time difference, the time zone difference, we weren't in the offices at the same time. We never saw each other. I was growing up an entire department away from the rest of corporate. And there was limited kind of communication as a result of so many of those obstacles and hurdles. It was a very successful experience when you stand back and take a look at it, but the mental toll that it took was just absolutely immense. I lost personal relationships as a result. I worked constantly. I was skinny as a rail, not in a good way. I wasn't healthy, and I wasn't taking care of myself first. I was really just chasing after a goal instead of really balancing what was good for me and being really honest about it. And so I think oftentimes we end up thinking we're stuck when really we're just making bad choices, and like I said, I'm really thankful, and I'm even thankful for the negative sides of that stuff and coming to that realization that, I was never stuck there. There was not that much miscommunication. It was just a whole bunch of choices that were being made that I didn't want to take ownership of because it was easier and because I was so stuck in a story.
Yeah.
Shit, man. That was excellent, Paige. Not to, thank you. Like, seriously, thank you.
Okay, good question. Will Allred.
Hey, and hey, Paige.
Hi.
So I read the description for the talk and I got super excited. My parents divorced when I was 3, and I watched my mom do a lot of the things that you're talking about, outsourcing things, but also busting her ass. She went from bank teller to Big Four consulting, managing some of the biggest contracts for her firm. And you know, I I even watched her sell her dream car so that I could go to a better school at high school. I was gonna ask a question about the step back to AE, but I think that's kind of been drawn out. So I'm curious, what stood out from your experience with Scott or others that a founder like me for an early stage company could try to emulate to support someone like you?
Yeah. So something that really stood up with Scott was, and it always catches me when people, you're Scott now. You're no longer Lise, I guess. You're now Scott. I've always just called him Lise. Something that really stood out was he was all, and I'm sure you guys will totally agree with me on this. He's always been very available and always very human. And so I found a level of respect in our relationship with him that he would easily, and this sounds like a backhanded compliment, but he had an easy way of telling me no or crushing whatever dream I had in the best possible way. He would tell me no that I couldn't have, but then he would tell me how I could. And I needed that. I didn't need, and I have had this experience with a lot of people, whether it was romantic partners, friends, other coworkers, or my bosses, that would tell me what they felt I would need to hear to stop asking for what I wanted. I would ask for more responsibility. And instead of being told, yes, you can have this true responsibility, they'd give me like busy work, or they would divert my attention to something else. I remember one year for New Year's, I said, one of my New Year's resolutions, Lise, is this conversation. I want you to start exposing me to more of what you do, because that's the kind of role that I want. And so he did. So he would bring me along to specific types of meetings, or he would open up, his playbook and tell me why he's doing certain things. And a lot of it was like way over my head, but it was almost a learning by osmosis kind of thing. His availability transcended just the day-to-day, like making sure that my KPIs were on board. He'd check in with things, and realized and understood the importance of my mental health and my mental state and where I actually was in my life in order to be able to reach those goals. It's one of the things that I've done with my reps ever since is, making sure, and Brian could probably attest to this, making sure that people are bringing their truest self to the work that they're doing and allowing that to speak for itself. He would just check in on me and make sure that my headspace was in the right place. And I would say every once in a while, I need a refocus session. I need you to help me refocus and put into line and get me realigned with where my goals are and which direction I'm going. But I used to ask my reps, and I need to get back to this, and I still do with the kill sheets, Brian, but I would ask my reps to send me their month, and they would send me what they thought they were going to be able to accomplish that month. And whether it was right on target, beyond target, or sometimes below target was okay with me, but they needed to tell me why. I had reps who would come to me and say, my grandmother is in her final stages. I think I'm going to lose her, or I'm moving this month, or, I'm going through some really heavy shit, or my life is really settled and I'm in a great place and I'm going to crush my goals and I'm 100% in it. There are all of these things that we as managers and leaders need to be conscious of and give grace and respect to, of things that are outside of our control. And that was one of the things that he did for me and that I try to do for my people.
Can I add one thing about this refocus sessions? Because I think it's pretty important. These are not like schedule one-on-one things. This is Paige traipsing through the office, opening my office door, closing it shut, sitting down, and just basically saying, I need a refocus session. Just like no respect for whatever else I had going on or what I was doing, which I loved. And I didn't mind the interruption. What bothered me with sales managers was when they were like overly respectful of my time. They're like, oh, I don't want to bother Scott. I don't want to do this time. Paige didn't give a fuck. She just burst into the office, sits down, and is like, I need you, and I need you now, and I need you to refocus me. I'm all fucked up, like, and we're gonna talk. And I would just be like, okay, here we go. So I just think that's an important lesson there to learn. Go ahead, Will. I can see you're about to.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say, I literally had that conversation this morning. Brian, maybe you were in on that. And I said, I want you, to my team, I said, I want you to treat me with the respect that I deserve to tell you no if you're crossing a boundary. But I want you to treat me with respect and allow me to tell you yes if I absolutely can and will help you. And that's exactly, what I felt so comfortable with Lise giving, that many people would say, if my door is closed, don't bother me. I didn't respect that. But, I did understand if he couldn't, he would tell me, get out, go away. And that's the kind of leadership that I want to also provide my reps.
That's super helpful. One of the things that I was going to ask as a follow-up question was how much of that was you being proactive versus Scott encouraging the conversation? It sounds like it was a lot of you being proactive. Was there something additional that Scott was doing that made you be more proactive outside of just general positive response when you came in the door?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that Lise would stand at the front of the room and say, I'm always available for you. He's not that way. It's more leading by actions and behaviors. He would interject. I remember there was a time that I was in a heated discussion with a prospect, and I turned around and he's like right there with call coaching advice right afterwards. And it wasn't what I wanted to hear. It's what I needed to hear. And it was little tiny layers of being available at a very human and non-like VP kind of a way, where he would make the rounds and he was visible and he had his boots on the ground and he got dirty and he would do call reviews and he would do the 8 a.m. trainings and the lunchtime trainings. I don't know where it said that VPs are elevated to a place that they sit in a golden office on, away from everybody, but he wasn't like that. And so it was the behaviors and being very honest and in a respectful way, not blowing smoke up my ass, but telling me no or telling me yes when I needed to hear those things. The constant boot on my back was oftentimes uncomfortable. And I learned to live in that just outside of my comfort zone due to him constantly pushing to be more and to do better. And so sometimes that would rub, and that in a way would also allow me to be more proactive, because he had a way of poking at me that made me be like, hey, I'm going to get up in my VP's face about this and ask him for something more. And, and it was just like we had that relationship, and he absolutely was proactive in nurturing that relationship, but it wasn't necessarily the, hey guys, my office is always open.
That's that toxic positivity stuff that Paige alluded to, and whether that counts as toxic positivity is really neither here nor there. It's just like, that's not the type of person that I am. That's not the type of person Paige is, right? I'm not going to stand up there and be like, okay, everybody, I'm here. Who can I help today? Like, that ain't me. Mm-hmm. But I'm here, and there's a difference there. So good. Those are good questions. Well, I'm going to move on to Ronan now, who's got a question about burnout.
So unlike everyone else, I didn't look at who we were talking to today and just jumped right in. And somehow, some way, the universe had a way of calling to the very thing I've been mulling over for a long time when you talked about burnout. And I'm sure many people feel the same way with post-COVID burnout. But you mentioned something really interesting about, is it time to move on? Is it time for a new role, or is it time to stay put and hunker down and refocus? Can you share from your experience any insights on when what are some of the signals you look for?
So some of the signals that I saw were, I am a joyful person. I'm not a rosy posy, like, oh, everything is great. But, my mom used to call me a space cadet Pollyanna because I could be walking through a bombed out, environment and finding the flowers, and that is who I am. And when I stopped noticing and I stopped paying attention to those things were kind of the first inklings. And I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I find myself not paying attention to the person on the other side of the phone because I already know what they're going to say, and I'm not digging in and I'm not building that true trust and rapport with people like I need to be. And here I was talking about my commitment to learning about people and experiencing all of these. I mean, where else, what other kind, besides being an interviewer or a reporter or something, do you get the opportunity to be exposed to 100 different people a day? And that is something. You can look at it as 100 dials a day and think, oh my God, that's an absolute grind. Or you can look at it as an opportunity to talk to 100 people. And if you're somebody like me that wants to hear all of their stories, I mean, my God, humans of New York, or what is that? Humans in New York?
Yeah.
I mean, they make a living off of meeting as many people. And that's our job too. We don't take pictures of them and we're trying to sell them something, but it's the same thing. It's just in a different lens, no pun intended, photography site. But, when I stopped paying attention, that was a major red flag, because I am a naturally curious person. And I do, Lisa and I will joke about, oh, we hate everybody, but I think they just really, I don't think we hate everybody. I think we love them and they just really exhaust us.
That's such a good explanation. Oh my God. I love that.
So that was one of the things. And when things started to get hard, things that weren't difficult things for me to do, but it started getting hard to get up in the morning, to go to this job, to see these people, to make the phone calls, to read the scripts, to take part and engage in the conversations during trainings when I just didn't have much to say. Those were symptoms and signs of my own burnout. But I think those look different for everybody. And I don't necessarily think that my signals would be someone else's signals. I do think that when things change from where you spend and where you are going in a straight line, and things all of a sudden or very slowly kind of turn and jump off track, and you're no longer in this place where you're kind of in your groove, that should be your red flag. Some people are a lot more sensitive to knowing when one foot is off the track or when they've completely gone off the rails.
So, okay. Let's go to Zach. You ready, Zach?
I'm here. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, man.
Hey, Paige. Thank you for sharing your story. It's been awesome. I'm just curious about, you've made that transition, rep to manager, back to rep, back to manager a couple times. So I'm curious from the company, was there ever a gray spot where you were kind of that player coach? I've been interested hearing Scott talk about that. Not a big fan of that. So I'm curious about that for you at your company, and also mentally making that transition from hey, everything I do is tied to this number to now I'm running a team.
So you want to know about that mindset shift from being a rep to being a manager?
And if you're ever in a middle ground of kind of doing both.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been asked that a lot, and, a lot of people, especially when I first went into management and went from a Friday being a rep to a Monday being a manager, like, was that really different? And did it, like, was it a complete mindset shift? For me, I don't necessarily, I never felt like it was that different. And I've tried to think about why, because this is a question that gets asked anytime I do an interview, which it's a great question, but I get asked that question all the time. And I've wrestled with, like, what was it? And for me, I don't necessarily think that there was this big shift. It did feel more natural to boss people around, it felt a little bit more like my thing, because I think Lisa's the same way. Like, just do what I'm telling you to do. I'm that person that's like, don't you see the writing on the wall? Can't you see this good advice? Just freaking do this. I know it's going to work. That's kind of, that's me in a nutshell, basically. But the shift mindset wise and my perspective on things was full of nuance versus being this big shift, where when I became a manager of the team that I was a manager of, I had kind of earned the respect of the people that were on my team. There wasn't like this, like, oh, is she going to be able to do this? I had already been kind of a peer leader. I was running trainings. I was creating trainings. I was call coaching people. I was interacting with them in a way that created some respectful boundaries and some lines. But where it was easier for me, and I think this is probably getting to the answer that you're looking for more than what I've just gone through, was I feel more of a payoff in spreading my knowledge amongst the masses versus being my own rocket. I wish I did this more. I don't look at my paychecks. I don't follow my bank account. I just shovel coal at some point. At some point, I'll look back there and see what I have, and I'll spend it on all new furniture or something. Buy myself a lake house next door to Lisa's. But for right now, I'm just shoveling that as coal. What does impact me is if I've got reps, and I have one rep who hit his first bounty, which is a huge accomplishment, last month. He hit his second bounty. We thought it was going to take 9 months to get from the first bounty to the second. He hit his second bounty yesterday. That pays me off more than getting my own paycheck, is seeing somebody else achieve these things and being able to say I helped get him there. Because when I laid those bounties out, he told me, I don't even know why you did that. I'm never going to be able to reach them. And now he's hit 2. And so that again goes along with Lisa's little, like, I pay you to close deals, not to always be right. Like, I know what I can get people to do, and I know what they're capable of, sometimes more than I think that they feel confident in themselves. And so I think that's the biggest, like, difference in rep and manager mentality for me, was spreading myself amongst the many versus being my own rocket ship. I just did not get paid off doing it for myself like I did do for doing it for many.
Cool. All right, I'm super excited to hear about the next question, which is going to come from David Fox, because it's all about relationships with the C-suite.
Yeah, so Paige, love the story. I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, the fact that you've given out 37 recommendations to your 27, and the 27 that you got were pretty special. It says a lot about just being a servant leader. And throughout this conversation, we've heard lots of tones of servant leadership and taking care of your team. There's that layer above. And for most people here that are going to be a VP of sales, that first time or second time is probably with a first-time founder as well, first-time CEO. And so I'm curious of fostering and cultivating that relationship with the C-suite, with your CEO, with the board, and any best practices or any guidance that you'd want to share.
Yeah. So I feel like this role that I have with Talru I did things the right way in the interview process. I just saw something, and I've got this good friend who's kind of in this dating thing right now, where she's just dating a ton, and she's, every time she comes to me, she's like, I don't think he likes me. I don't think he likes me. And I'm like, if I hear I don't think he likes me one more time, you never say, I don't think I like him. And it was the same way in the interview process too. This time around, when I interviewed, I remember talking to Lise and just being like feverish that, oh my God, I have found my people, that I really qualified hard on the C-suite that I was going to work with. And the ground foundation has been laid between myself and my CFO and my CEO, as well as my VP of CS and who will be my VP of marketing. We've laid a really solid foundation in getting to know each other and constantly checking in and making sure that our values are aligned and that expectations are very transparent and clear. It may sound like a luxury, but I would also credit a huge amount to the fact that we kept Scott Leese on as a sales advisor, and we have a one-on-one, well, a two-on-one with him every single week. And so for anybody who's looking to have, you know, a salesperson or a sales VP or a marketing VP or CS, to have that consistent advisorship that's there, that asks the right kinds of questions and kind of plays, you know, just the moderator of conversations, and helps demystify and also sometimes translate, I think is incredibly important. And I don't know that I would do that any other way. If I ended up going into advising, it's one of the things that I would really fight for, is to keep those advisors, at least for a period of time that you think is too long, you know, because I mean, I still, you know, I'm going through this hyper growth phase right now, and we could have parted ways with Lise 6 months ago or whatever, and I'm sure I would have been okay. But now I'm going through this hyper growth phase that I'm going into something that's new and that's different. And I need to make some asks, and I still need to refine the way that I communicate with my C-suite. And having that extra layer there is really helpful. Beyond that, I'm an over communicator. And one thing that I did make sure to find was somebody who was an over communicator as well. And I think communication styles are really important in creating that trust and those boundaries and setting those expectations, because we don't all communicate the same way. And when you've got misaligned communication styles, that's not a deal breaker, but it is something that needs to be addressed. So beyond that, I think just making sure that the value alignment is always there, and that you're always looking in the same direction, and that you're never losing sight of one another.
It's great guidance. A quick follow-up. The 8 to, what was it, 30 by August? Did that come from you in a waterfall kind of capacity build out, or from top down going like, you need to hit this number, so you better hire X number?
No, we agreed that it would be 30 by the end of the year. I have a hard time of shutting the fuck up at times. And I know that I can do it. And so we start looking at our numbers, and we're doing really well. And I will say my number one fear is not that I'm going to fail. I'm never afraid that I'm going to fail. I know that's just part of the territory, and I'm going to fail, and I've come to terms with it. My number one fear is that I'm going to miss out on an opportunity that's going to pass right beneath my nose, and I'm not going to be prepared to take advantage of it. And so right now we happen to be in kind of a unicorn time period, that I am watching opportunity starting to pass by that I don't have enough sales reps ramped to take advantage of. By the end of this year, we could either close this year out as a good year, or as something to write about. And I want this to be a career defining opportunity for myself as well as the people that I'm leading.
Thanks. I love that. I think you see so often Glassdoor you get trashed on Glassdoor. You know, you hired a bunch of people, then you had to riff because you were given something and it wasn't reasonable or realistic, and it was kind of a finger in the air. So thank you for sharing that. That's great. Good collaboration with your C-suite too.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Jennifer has a question about the light bulb moment.
Hi, Paige.
Hi.
This has been great so far. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, you're welcome.
So you had mentioned very briefly in your story, a lot of it spoke to me, but the number one thing I think that called to me was that mind shift that you had, and that it wasn't an overnight process. And I was wondering if we could go a little bit deeper into that.
Mhm.
And the reason I'm asking this question is because I'm in a very interesting space in my journey where I have a side hustle, but it's not so much a side hustle anymore. And I'm still very passionate about selling in a corporate environment in addition to running my own business. But what's really interesting is that my why for my business is almost polar opposite to my why for corporate.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to remedy the two, and I'm driving myself crazy. And I don't know if they necessarily need to be remedied.
Mhm.
So I was just curious, as did this light bulb moment, the mind shift happen for you? Did it just pop into your consciousness, or was this something that you started a process of questioning and journaling? What did that look like?
Yeah. So it was multi-layered, as so many things often are. The thing that was the light bulb moment, the was me realizing and coming to terms with, like, I'm not going to be the president of the United States. You know, if that's what I wanted to be when I was a little kid, that's not what I'm going to be. I'm not going to be a veterinarian. And that's okay with me, because I said I wanted to be a veterinarian like twice, and I don't really like blood that much, and it's okay. But I'm not going to live, or at least I had come to terms with, I'm not going to do what I love 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. That was that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really hard pill for me to swallow, to think, are you fucking kidding me? Because when I had this light bulb moment, I was still making 100 dials a day. And I had to come to terms and embrace, and I did it. I had to embrace the fact that I'm giving up the idea that I'm going to have a 9 to 5 that I love, and then I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to be excited to go to work. I had to give that up, and I had to embrace and be excited about 100 dials a day. And the way that I did that was the slow light switch. The way that I did that was I started thinking about the bigger picture of, if I'm number one in the sales team, one of the things that I really like to do is to actually train, and I like to coach. And so I'm going to start doing that. It's not going to get me up in the morning. It's not going to be something that it's like a big driver. It's not going to be like my why. It's absolutely not. Because at the time, I was still so shell shocked by this new life that I was living. I didn't have a fucking clue what my why was.
Right.
I could feed you
So many are in that position.
Yeah, I could feed you guys a whole bunch of bullshit that my children were my why. But at that time, like, of course they're your why, but there's something more to it. And so the slow light switch was just the openness of finding the good and finding the little things that, I ended up making President's Club. And so I won a trip to Cancun, and I was like, check the box of traveling more. there's a thing. I ended up making my first $10,000 monthly commission check. And I was like, check the box. I can afford a really great Christmas for my daughters, you know? And so I started making these and sometimes I would talk it out in my car on my hour-long drive home, that I'd be like connecting the dots. And constantly, it's almost like neural pathways of like resetting your brain of like, I did these things and it led to these outcomes. And those things connected. And so the more that I did that, the more that it wove together, that I was positively impacting the things and I was finding my why. My why ended up being, I want to be somebody that would make my great Aunt Kitty proud, that my daughters can look up to and actually see when they hit a hurdle in their life. I know from experience, because I watched my mother go through this and she was successful. So those kind of things are my why. And by the way, my great Aunt Kitty was the first woman to ever vote in her city. And she was the recipient of many tomatoes in the face as a suffragette. And still, and it's a shadow I'm not going to grow out of. You know, she did something bigger than I am, but I want to be somebody that doesn't take that for granted. And that's my why. And showing that to my girls is my why. I learned those things from constantly connecting. This is what I did, and it's important and it means something, even if it's a grain of sand small. And this is what came out of it. And this is really impactful. And this is something that I love. And having the financial freedom to do those things, because I ended up being a top producer, is absolutely one of them. No.
Thank you.
Yep.
And the why is still there, still the same, just
The why
slightly changed.
Yep, the why is more there than it ever has been. My daughters are now almost college age, and they don't necessarily want to follow in my footpath. And I feel like that's almost a win for me, because they feel empowered to go and chase after dreams. And they also feel like there's a safety net there for them, that their mother will help them get through these things. And that feels like a big win.
Very cool.
All right. Nat, I see you. Take yourself off mute, Nat. Hey, Nat, we can't hear you very good at all.
All right, sorry about that.
There you go.
All right, great session, Paige, and thank you, Scott, as usual, for arranging this session. I had a quick question around preconceived notion, Paige. I know you talked a little bit about having or shedding preconceived notion previously. What I was thinking is, we run into a lot of different situations every day, and what is the easiest way to avoid getting into preconceived notion consciously, if and when you come across, is what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm. So you mean by the stigma, the preconceived notion of what salespeople are and what we do?
It may be around situations, or maybe a sales situation, or a person itself. I don't know. I mean, as it's a little broader in nature. I'm thinking. Did I?
Yeah, what you said you were thinking?
Yeah, no, so sorry. I kind of paused there. I thought my internet connection kind of went down, but yeah, it was more about maybe, I don't have an example to share today, but maybe in a certain situation where we kind of think that this happened because of this. And then obviously if you kind of dig deeper, find out what the cause was, and you come out with a solution. But many a times when you're running into a lot of things again and again, how do you kind of consciously stop yourself on getting into a preconceived notion of thought and kind of looking at more broadly and getting a solution out of it?
Yeah. Okay. So I think, one of those is that I struggled with this preconceived notion of what salespeople are. And the first step to that, and kind of battling the preconceived notion, whether you walk into it and you have this preconceived notion, or it's thrust upon you of being the preconceived notion, is to face it and adjust accordingly. And so when I was thinking about like, oh my God, here I am, a salesperson, I was in the midst of this. I mean, Lise can attest to this. He brought us to go and see Wolf of Wall Street. And that was so similar to the experience that we were living at the time. It was really brash, loud people. The sales floor was super loud. It was everything that the movie said it was. And it was something that I kind of, at that time, I was rebelling against. And I had to confront that. That's the word I was looking for. You've got to face and confront those preconceived notions and challenge them. Because the reality was, Wolf of Wall Street was a fabrication and a fictionalized account of some true stories, and what I was living was actually just the truth. And I had to start like poking holes in what was fictionalized and what I allowed my head to kind of create into this bigger story than what it truly was, and find the little sources of truth that were in there. Yes, it was a very loud sales organization. No, not everybody spent their money on cocaine and hookers and yachts, Yes, there was a ton of money there. And yes, people were creating better lives for themselves, and they were all real people, and they weren't these skeevy little car salespeople that, the rest of society looks and thinks of salespeople as being. But I think to confront that and to look for where the truth is and where the preconceived like stigma is the first step of breaking down those preconceived notions.
Okay. Yeah, that helps.
Okay, we are going to go to one more question, and it's from Anna Paula AP. Got a question about prioritizing.
Yeah. Hey, Paige.
Hi.
You're amazing. I think I have a crush. But wanted to start with, so when you go into a new leadership position, right? And you come in, and I'm on week 2, and there's like a million things that need to get done, right? So you got to build a sales playbook because one doesn't exist. And you've got to go and you've got to figure out your tech stack, and then you got to start hiring people. And now you've got to try and build a forecast, and you realize that everything that's there just needs to be completely reworked, and you got to work on pricing models. How do you prioritize? What do you?
So I'm really glad that this was our last question, because this is a great one. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, I'll get an opportunity to remember and to tell you, which is the prioritization. The first thing is, and when I went into management for the first time, I went to a million different sources, and I said, hey, tell me about when you went into leadership. And I talked to Lise, and I talked to just anybody who would listen and who had ever done anything that was in a leading position. One of those was my mother. If you didn't hear that right, I call her my mother because that's the kind of relationship that we have. She's my mother. Sometimes we get along swimmingly, and sometimes she's my mother. And I almost felt a little bit of resentment at the end of this practice and this exercise, because the piece of advice that I walked away with that has most impacted my leadership was a piece of advice that my mom gave me. And it's so simple. You'll hear it and you're like, I was waiting for something profound, and then you gave me this. And it's like, yeah, but it works. You can't ignore that it works, which is make the main thing the main thing. And I know everybody's like, womp, womp. It is so incredibly powerful to constantly make the main thing the main thing. Because there's never a time that if I've got competing priorities, I can think of only a few times that I wasn't able to say that's the main thing. I say all the time with my sales reps in my current position, I have 3 priorities. And in fact, I can tell you Talru has 3 priorities. There are only 3 priorities of this entire company. That's to bring on new customers, that's to grow existing customers, and that is to lower the attrition rate of our existing customers. Anything that doesn't serve those 3 priorities is not a main thing. And so making that main thing the main thing is the main thing. The second thing that you had said was you're 2 weeks in and you don't have a playbook because one doesn't exist. I call bullshit on that. I call bullshit on it. Lise has a playbook. I have a playbook. In fact, I've been told I've been the only sales VP in an interview to actually expose a true living document that is my sales playbook. I know the kind of metrics that are going to be important to me. I know I have a tech stack portfolio and I'm constantly taking demos with more tech companies just so that I have a Rolodex of available software to use at my disposal. And I have over the years amassed, I still have stuff from Main Street Hub because Lisa and I with my daughters, she was 10 at the time. She used to, on a piece of paper, write down people's names and how many dials they had and how many discovery calls they had. And she would read those numbers off to me and I'd put them into the computer. Lise, did you know that Ava and I used to do that?
I don't think I ever heard that story before. No.
That's how Ava got really good at her multiplication tables.
What's that? We got her through math.
Yeah. But I still have tools from back then when we were at Main Street Hub, and I keep them on a Google Drive and I pull them out every once in a while and I reformat them and make sure that they're staying up to date and look at what's missing and what I need to have. And I've got a massive file in Google that anytime I have something new, I stick it in there so that I have a playbook. And I'll tell you, it is the reason that, and I said this at the end of my time with Indio, I went in and I presented that playbook to Indio. It's the same playbook I brought into Talru. It got us to acquisition in 1.5 years at Indio, and it's gotten us to a $100 million run rate at Talru. And I have done all of the things that I said I was going to do. And it was easy because I had a plan there. So make the main thing and make sure that you keep your playbook up to date because there is one.
Yeah, so luckily enough on the playbook, I actually just finished writing a massive playbook with Scott.
Ah, good.
But now I do need to obviously rework it for the company and position I'm in now. So
we worked on one for a prior role, Paige, and now she's in a new, better role. So.
Nice.
Yes, with full support and much more.
Very similar experiences here, Paige. You and AP in terms of a prior company you were at and how things went with C-suite and whatnot. To hopefully she'll be in a good spot the way you are now. But yeah,
excellent.
Yeah.
I goofed and accidentally skipped over Lori. So we're gonna have one bonus question if that's okay.
Yep.
You hear Lori?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi Paige, you sound like you're ready for a TED Talk. I would love to hear you. My question, you've answered it multiple times. The reason for my question is I have my first sales job. It's later in life. It's, I've had several careers, several jobs. Inside sales, outbound, and I have to make 30 calls a day. So that's a lot less than the 100 that you had to make. So my first question was going to be, even though you've discovered that you like to talk to people, how did you, when it comes down to it, how do you keep yourself going? But I've heard you say that it was because you like to talk to people, and also because the other thing you shared was that that you started checking things off the box, like taking the trip to Cancun and things like that. I'm in a situation where I have some boundaries, like I can only call on certain clients. And if I call on clients that are bigger than my lane that I have to stay in, I can't pursue them. So when you were faced with boundaries like that, how have you faced them and just kind of kept yourself motivated?
Yeah, so there are always the boundaries, and there are always the lanes that you've got to stay in, and the hurdles that you have to cross. For me, it was a matter of just remaining and staying steadfast to being curious about all things, and so if I could only call into certain industries, then I got really curious about specifically those industries. I had an account list at my independent contributor role when I took the step back and became an AE for a period of time, that I had 50 accounts that I could work. There weren't any others. I had those 50. And so I became intimately involved in their lives, and I befriended them. And I still keep in touch with a number of those prospects that I either closed or didn't close over the past, it's probably been 4 years now. And so I think the thing that has allowed me to get beyond any of the hurdles that I've encountered, whether they were boundary or whatever they were, is to stay really steadfast in being curious as to what can this teach me? What can I learn from it? Who are these people? What's important for them? How can I be of service to them? What can I learn from these people? And what kind of solutions would be appropriate for them, even if they're not the ones that I have. I've been a catalyst of change for a number of my prospects when I haven't been the solution itself, and so there's always something deeper, and there's always something more. As far as checking off the boxes and keeping myself going, like I said, I'm a space cadet Pollyanna. I can walk through a war field and find the posies wherever I go. And so I would look for those opportunities to find, like, can I make this check a box? I got this great commission check. I finally get to bring my girls on a vacation, that kind of thing. And I would really, like I said, knit that together and look at the cause and the effect of the little things that I was doing. I think we say small wins so much that it kind of gets lost in all of the jargon and the toxic positivity of things. But I really took that to heart, and I really focused on those small wins, but not just the wins, but the process to get there.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate your non-toxic positivity.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, Paige, this has been incredible. Gotten lots of amazing feedback on the side, and I'm sure a bunch of people will reach out to you. Thank you for your time, and it's always good to chat with you. And we'll see all of you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, guys.